Welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Yasmin and I make DIY, home decor, and organization videos every single week. So in last week's video, I went to Target to check out Studio McGee's new spring collection, and I just got inspired to go on their website and see what else they have new. And while their home decor line collab with Target is pretty affordable, most of the items on McGeeandCo.com are on the pricier side. I actually found a few pieces that I really like and I want to try and recreate them for less, so let's go ahead and jump right in. For the first project, I recreated this black infinity loop that retails for $68 on McGeeandCo.com using some black polymer clay. These types of decor pieces have been really trendy lately, and I've seen multiple different variations of them. I particularly like this one because I think it's simple but interesting enough, and I wanted to have it for myself. In the first step, I grabbed a chunk of black polymer clay and started breaking it apart and kneading it until it was soft and easy to work with. This step can sometimes be time consuming, especially if the clay has been sitting around for a long time. But it's very important to take the time to warm up the clay properly to avoid any air bubbles and breakage later on. Once the clay was soft and ready to work with, I started rolling it out into a long cylinder shape. I took my time during this process to make sure the thickness of the clay was the same throughout, about 3/4 of an inch. Next, I folded the clay into a sideways U shape. From there, I pulled the top end under the bottom end so the loop is created in the middle. Then, I fed one end over the other into the loop and pulled it through. This is basically how you create a simple knot, except that it's a loose knot. I adjusted the clay shape as needed to make the two intertwined loops about the same size. Once I was happy with the general look of the clay knot, I attached the two ends together with my fingers. I gently pressed them together and made sure that the seam is invisible in the end. I also wasn't too worried about this piece being perfect because the original one from Studio McGee seems to have some imperfections on the surface that gives it a handmade look. In the last step, I baked this in the oven according to the instructions on the clay packaging. After baking, I let it sit and cool down for about 45 minutes. That finished off this first Studio McGee Decor Dupe DIY, and I'm so happy with how this infinity loop turned out. It's the perfect decor piece for any space, and it can be easily styled in any room, on a shelf, coffee table, or even a dresser. Not to mention it was really easy to make, and this one only cost about $5. In the second project, I recreated these decorative gray beads using the leftover black clay from the last DIY and some white polymer clay. This specific piece is priced at $75 on their website, and I knew that I can make it for less with just a couple of items. Small bead garlands are also very trendy in home decor right now, and they really fit within any design style. I started by kneading each of the clay chunks to make them soft and easy to work with. Now I didn't have gray colored clay, so I decided to make my own. I did this by twisting the black and white clays together over and over until the marbling effect faded and I was left with gray clay. If you decide to recreate this project, you can buy gray clay from your local craft store and skip this step altogether. Also, don't forget to customize the color of your decorative beads to your taste, as it doesn't necessarily have to be gray. In the next step, I created small ball shapes out of my gray clay. The diameter of each one is just a little shy of 1 inch, and I tried to make them all about the same size. I didn't measure every single one, and I basically just eyeballed it as I wasn't too worried if they slightly differed in shape and size. Again, the original piece from Studio McGee looks very organic and handmade, and I wanted to replicate that in this DIY. I was able to make 18 ball shapes with the clay that I had. You can make more or less depending on how big or small you want your bead garland to turn out in the end. Next, to create the stone-like texture from the original piece, I used some good old salt. I poured some salt into a small glass container to make it easier to dip the ball shapes in. I basically rolled each one in the salt and made sure that all sides of it were covered. Afterwards, I gently rolled each clay ball shape between my palms in a circular motion just to make the salt become a part of the clay and to get rid of any excess salt. I then repeated this step with the rest of them. Next, I used a small screwdriver to create a hole in the first ball shape. You can use any sharp object to create the hole, just make sure to push in gently to avoid any deformation in the clay. Then, I threaded some butcher's twine through the hole and repeated this process for all of the ball shapes until they were all on the twine. I created a knot on the twine rope and cut the excess off. I left some extra twine exposed so that I can recreate it as close to the original Studio McGee piece as possible. Anyways, I baked this in the oven at 275 degrees for about 45 minutes. After that, I let it completely cool down for 30 minutes. In the last step, I used some natural raffia to create the top of this decorative bead garland. I had this in my craft stash, but you can pick up some raffia from your local craft store. I started by creating a knot on one side of the exposed twine. I then wrapped the raffia around the twine over and over until I reached the other side. Halfway through, I used a tiny bit of hot glue to hold the raffia in place and prevent it from unraveling. Once I got to the other end, I pulled the raffia tight and created a couple knots to secure it in place. That completed the second Studio McGee Decor Dupe DIY, and I really love how this decorative bead garland came out. It was super fun and easy to make, and it looks almost identical to the original piece. I'm really happy that I was able to recreate this with clay and some household items for a fraction of the price. I think all in all this cost about $6 or so, and you just can't beat that. For the last project, I recreated this dotted planter from Studio McGee that is listed at $68 on their website. They actually sell this in 2 different sizes, and I decided to go for the design of the larger size as it fitted my style better. To make this dupe, I used some white polymer clay and a Christmas plant pot that I picked up from Ross for only $6. You can get a similar pot from any home decor store or from the gardening section at Home Depot or Lowe's. I'm sure you know the drill by now, but I started by kneading and warming up the clay. Once ready, I grabbed smaller chunks of the clay and rolled them into ball shapes. I tried to make them all about the same size, but similar to the last projects, perfection is really not required for this decor piece. In the end, I had 8 of these clay balls. Next, I placed the first clay ball shape on the side of the planter towards the top and gently pushed it in place. I made sure to not push it too much, but just enough to mimic the original pot from Studio McGee. I then adjusted it as necessary to make sure it will fit the planter after baking. I repeated the same process with the remainder of the clay pieces. Once ready, I baked them in the oven for about 20 minutes and let them cool down afterwards. I didn't film this part, but while the clay was baking and cooling down, I soaked a couple of paper towels in white vinegar and placed them on the Christmas print on the pot. I let it soak for 30 minutes and then I was able to easily scrape off that print. In the next step, I lightly sanded the surface of the planter with 150 grit sandpaper to help glue and paint stick better later on. After that, I used the mixture of super glue and hot glue to attach the clay pieces to the planter. I pretty much eyeballed the placement of all these and tried to glue them symmetrical around the planter. While gluing, I held each one in place for a few seconds to make sure it's secure in place. In the last step, I took the planter out in the garage and gave it 2 full coats of satin white spray paint. I let the paint dry for 30 minutes between coats. You can use any color spray paint or even acrylic paint for this step, and as always, don't forget to personalize it to your style. That concluded this last Studio McGee Decor Dupe DIY, and I think this planter is really cute. I like the small details on it, and I know that it will look good with any kind of greenery or florals in it. I'm glad that I was able to make this for about $10, and now I can't decide where I want to style this plant pot. Alright you guys, I hope that you enjoyed these Studio McGee home decor dupe projects and got some ideas and inspiration to recreate expensive decor that you like for less. Let me know in the comments below what other dupe projects you would like to see me create. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!